we all are thinking, oh, good, that change can be over and we can get back to normal. And 80% of us are thinking that. And we shouldn't, because change is not a project, it's not a one-off, it's not a short term, it's a part of life. And those of us that think, oh good, we can get over that virus or defeat that virus, we're kidding ourselves. So change is inevitable. The second one is that all change is personal. All change is actually personal, it's about people. The third thing is we all erect our own barriers to change, and we can overcome them. The fourth thing, probably most important, is that all change is emotional. Emotion is 4 times more powerful than change. And the last thing is that, we don't change if we're told to. We only change if we want to. So as leaders, it's actually our job to help our people to want to change.
Welcome back, everybody, to the Few podcast with Boo. That is me and my podcast buddy, Sean Sewell. G'day, Sean. How are you doing today, mate?
Awesome, Boo. Really looking forward to this episode of The Few, for sure.
Yeah, and I'm in the ocean room today. As you can see, it's a beautiful day down here in Sydney and bright blue ocean behind there. But a bit of a blue ocean strategy, some might say, which is a pretty lame segue into our guest today, who's far more exciting and has far more depth about him than the picture of the ocean behind me. Really excited. I had a good chat with today's guest earlier. We have got this really weird connection that both of us started our career and kind of had sliding doors moment. One of us went this way, the other went that way. But we'll keep that for a little bit later. Firstly, I just really want to welcome today Campbell McPherson. Thank you so much, Campbell, for joining us here today. Campbell is award-winning author, agent for change, leadership coach, speaker, basically a thought leader when it comes to human beings making change and transition. And uniquely, Campbell, you've sort of made a bit of a move into the second phase of life with your latest book. So Campbell, thanks so much for coming on the Few podcast today.
Absolute pleasure. I've been looking forward to this for weeks. So great to meet
nice
you,
of you to say.
in person, and great to meet you too, Sean.
Yeah, great to have you on, Campbell. Thank you.
So Campbell, once upon a time, you started flying airplanes. Do you want to tell us a little bit about that story?
Well, it wasn't so much flying, really. It was more like Buzz Lightyear would have said. It was falling with style. I had to memorize the eye chart in the Air Force. I'm about 10 years or so older than you. So back in the early 80s, I joined the RAAF Academy thinking, I'm going to be a fighter pilot like you were, Boo. And it was not to be, because I had to memorize the eye chart just to keep flying. Luckily, back then at Point Cook, they never changed the eye chart. So back in the 80s, all you really needed to do to learn how to fly was know CLED, HB, TVO, and you're through.
It's got to hustle your way through. No bluff too tough, as they say.
But it was actually there's several defining moments which are best placed around that spoke about around a bar. But one particularly, where I thought, no, this wasn't for me, is as I was coming down onto a different runway. I never didn't know the words. Landing on a different runway.
That's a fairly standard portion of most flights, mate, even commercial airlines.
It's been a while. Yeah. Anyway, I almost took out the guard box at the front of the base, and the guard actually poked his head outside and ducked as I went past. So when I finally landed, my instructor, he really didn't like me very much, he unscrewed his joystick and started to beat me over the head. Or over the helmet, luckily, with it. And really, I shouldn't have laughed. And anyway, so I have the record of being the worst pilot ever to make it through to jet training. And, it's something to be proud of.
Absolutely. And if that didn't happen, you would not have a story to tell. So every time.
Exactly. And
this is the thing about life.
It is. And of course, that was the first change from that was the first change was accidentally joining the Air Force. The second change in my life was realizing that wasn't for me. And so my career has just gone on a roller coaster ride of an eclectic array of careers ever since that, really. And change has been the only constant throughout all of them.
I think there's a bit of a mindset with pilots as well. As I get older and come across more pilots, they tend to Sean's dad's a pilot, by the way. It's something I don't think we've actually ventured into before on the Few podcast. But
50 years of flying, yeah.
Yeah, and Sean was a racing car driver, and his brother is. So between the three of us, I'd say there's some ADHD / there's something wrong with pilots in terms of their ability to do one thing for a exceedingly long period of time.
That certainly is.
So what were some of the lessons that you took away from that experience then, Campbell? Like, I mean, if other people have got through, I'm going to go and do this and become a fighter pilot or whatever the case is, and then suddenly there's this moment of, okay, I'm really, really crap at that. Now I've got to rethink and reinvent the wheel. Obviously back then and compared to what you know now, but how did you process that at the time? How did you deal with that change? Were you happy to not be flying, given that you nearly took out the guard tower and the guard in it as well?
That was one of my best landings. I really I was. Looking back on it, what I learned was you can't be good at everything. So you just have to face it. So you have to accept reality, even though it was something that you wanted throughout your childhood. So there I was at 21 thinking, okay, I'm not good at this. When I resigned, I walked into my instructor's office and I saluted and said, sir, I'd like to resign. And he said, oh, thank goodness for that. So it was a mutually agreeable parting of the ways. But what I learned was you can't be good at everything. So then I looked around and thought, right, what skills have I got? What qualifications have I got? Who would find the experience that I have today valuable? And so then I applied for Hawker Pacific to be a management trainee, and off I went on all sorts of different adventures. But I think that's what I learned, to actually take stock, have a look at what your skills are, your experience are, and most importantly, who would find them valuable, and then use what you've got, use the assets you've got.
The one thing that I have seen I work with a lot of small business owners in a group that I run, and one of the things that I've seen too is when someone hits a wall like that, they can respond in one of two ways. They can do what you did, and they can be okay, not really working out. I'm not good at that. I need to shift direction and then move forward again. Whereas other people have this singular idea, and when that doesn't come to fruition, they fall in a heap. How have you had any moments like that in your life? You've been pretty much, I guess, giving yourself other options, or have you seen other people overcome that type of situation? I've
seen people dive into the trough of what I call the burning platform change curve when big change is done to them. In fact, this is a perfect segue into my latest book, The Power to Change, which is out now, available from Booktopia. It's all about how to embrace personal change. So when big change is done to us, we go through a roller coaster of emotions that Professor or Dr. Kubler-Ross, found back in the 1960s. And all of us change practitioners, we've adapted her change curve. She called it the grief curve, but the change curve. So it's a roller coaster of emotions that we go through, and at the bottom of it is what I lovingly call the trough of depression, where when you're hit with big change, you go through denial, you go through anger, you go through fear, you go through anxiety, and then you do hit a wall, as you brilliantly said. And either you've then got a choice to be able to then drag yourself out of that trough with your head kicking and to go, no, there are options. I've got talents. I can do something with this. I need to pivot my strategy, as you was alluding to. And then your heart can kick and go, okay, no, I can really do this. I've tried, I've experimented, and it can be done, to move on. But that's the crucial time when you're in that trough. And I know very good friends who have stayed in that trough all their year and all of their life after their first hit, and so many others who have crawled out of it, either with help or by looking themselves in the mirror and saying, okay, you've been dealt a bad hand. There's nothing you can do about it. What am I going to do about it now? So it's about looking at the future. But that's what the book is all about, is how to cope with those moments in life, but also to make sure you don't just have a 5-year strategy as businesses used to do before COVID, make sure strategy is flexible. And again, any strategy, being it personal or business, is based on what I talked about earlier, is a full understanding and appreciation of the talents and the skills and all the things that make you special, whether as an individual or as a business. And then you can have a flexible strategy, because the core, if you like, to use a yoga term, core is strong.
Campbell, two questions based on what you just said. The first one is, how easy is it, or is it advisable when you're experiencing your first major changes in life to do that by yourself, or should you make it a point of finding some help? And secondly, your first experience with change, probably like Sean's and myself, you didn't go, oh, this has changed. So at what point in your life did you start identifying with this concept of change?
Yeah, Boo, that's a really good one. The first one is always seek help. It's always better to seek help, but sometimes the help is not there. As anyone who has been made redundant, which I have a couple of times in my life, companies particularly, if it's organizational change, they don't really offer the help that they should. They never have, they never will. And some try, some pretend to try, but find someone. And if you can't find someone, know that you can be your own catalyst for change. You can be your own leader for change if you want to. The second one is a really good question. When did I realize change was a discipline and actually label it as such? It was when I joined Anderson Consulting back in the mid-90s, after having run a multimedia business before I knew you could put multi and media together to cause a word that described what I was doing. But so I joined that about 97, and I into the change division, and I went, that's interesting. I didn't know change was a thing. I didn't know it was a discipline. I just thought it was something that happened. So that's when I 25 years ago is when I started to go, hang on, this change thing, this resonates. This is a discipline, and I can make this work, and I can make it work better than Anderson Consulting used to do, because their change was all about systems, was all about processes, was all about spreadsheets, was all about business models, and change is about none of them. It's about people.
It's interesting, Campbell, when you talk about the human approach to change and the systems approach to change. As you've become more familiar with change, and as you have more experience, and one of the interesting things about being a thought practice leader is obviously when you start your journey, as you evolve and you receive more inputs from various companies and individuals that have undertaken this change. Yep. Do you see a symbiotic relationship between the two, that free fall change, which is all humanist in its approach, is I guess doomed to fail in some respects, that there is some structure and some methods and some habits that you can apply?
No, but you're totally right. You do need both, but the emphasis has got to be on the people. So if you were to, it's an 80-20 thing, it's 20%, you've got to have processes, you've got to have structure. Otherwise people will be running off in all sorts of directions. I think a great bumper sticker saying I read somewhere was that strategy without implementation is a daydream, and implementation without strategy is a nightmare. You need both sides of this coin. So when it comes to change, you've got to have the process, and you've also got to have the outcomes, but the outcomes has got to outweigh the process, because a process without outcomes is a road to nowhere. It's a map to nowhere. So you've got to have both, but the emphasis has got to be on the outcomes. In fact, what I've learned over the last 25 years about change, looking back on it, can be distilled into 5 key truths, really, that sound like blinding glimpses of the obvious, but they're really not. And the first one is that all change is inevitable. Now, that sounds a bit obvious, but if you think about it at the moment, we're all coming out of the pandemic, or thinking about coming out of the pandemic, depending on where you live. And we all are thinking, oh, good, that change can be over and we can get back to normal. And 80% of us are thinking that. And we shouldn't, because change is not a project. It's not a one-off. It's not a short term. It's a part of life. And those of us that think, oh, good, we can get over that virus or defeat that virus, we're kidding ourselves. So change is inevitable. The second one is that all change is personal. And that's when I was talking about before. I learned that from Anderson Consulting, who was all change is systems. They've been talking about. And it wasn't. It's all change is actually personal. It's about people. The third thing is that we all erect our own personal.
Clearly, Campbell, this is why Anderson's ended up going out of business, right? They just didn't listen to you.
It's actually going out of business. They did a fantastic deal. They did such a great deal that they all of their partners pocketed collective billions and had to change the name in the process. But that's another story. But the third thing is we all erect our own barriers to change, and we can overcome them. The fourth thing, probably most important, is that all change is emotional. Emotion is 4 times more powerful than change. And the last thing is that, we don't change if we're told to. We only change if we want to. So as leaders, it's actually our job to help our people to want to change.
Hmm.
It's sort of as simple and as complex as that.
Yeah, and that's a great reference. And yeah, you're talking about obviously that difference between systems and people. I mean, changing a system is a process or whatever it is, technology that you're using. That's somewhat easy, but the actual human piece. So that's kind of the steps of what we need to do. But the human part is the hard part. As you say, first they need to want to change it. You can't make them change. Doesn't matter whether you've spent 20 years with someone or you've known them for 5 minutes. If they don't want to change, they're not going to listen to you. That makes no difference whatsoever. But what would you say if people are looking to be able to adapt and embrace it more? What are some of the, I suppose, the methods or the ways that you've seen people be able to do that more, I suppose, with more ease, with less stress and challenge and things like that?
And on that note, Campbell, have you ever seen a change that was just so bad and just pull your hair out, car crash, so poorly managed, you thought, I've definitely learned a really good lesson from that?
That's such a good question, because I was hoping you weren't going to ask me if I've ever seen a change that is so good, because that would be really difficult to find. Change is so bad. Yeah, I've seen so many over the years, and it relates to Sean's question too. And that's about any system, any major IT change is, or almost every single one that I've seen has been a different level of disaster, but at least hasn't actually delivered what they set out to achieve. There was one particularly that I remember, is that it was a wealth management company that set about redoing their whole sales and advice systems. And what they made all the mistakes in the book, which was great, because then that was enabled me to write the first book, which is called The Change Catalyst, which actually won the 2018 Business Book of the Year over here in the UK, which was fabulous. So
that's very cool.
So the change, that was a really clumsy segue, but I had to get it in. So what happened here is that they were no clarity on what they were trying to achieve. And it was a really poor specification. And then that poor specification then changed dramatically to be, scope creep, as everybody calls it. So they weren't clear on what they were trying to achieve. They weren't clear on why they were trying to achieve it. It started out being a sales aid and ended up being a compliance tool. And they are two completely different things. They then didn't engage their people properly. They then just continued to hit the project team as though it was a racehorse, and if they just whipped it a bit more, it would go faster, which of course doesn't work in change. So all of the 10 reasons why change fails, I found to be revealed in this one project. And it ended up being 5 times over budget, 5 times late, and then scrapped and replaced completely with a packaged solution, which they should have done in the first place. And it was all down to leadership, and big change projects like that get a momentum all their own, like a steam train racing down the tracks, and it's politically impossible to jump out in front of it and say, stop, where are we going? But that's what needs to happen on big systems projects, because it becomes politically impossible to question. And if we don't question, if we don't engage our people, any change project's doomed to failure.
What about on the individual level? So the individual struggling with the change, with something that's going on, be it a redundancy or a broken relationship or something that whatever the human element part of it. How would you, or what have you seen that are ways to make that a little bit easier process for people to move through that?
Okay. Well, in the workshops that I run for employees, on embracing change workshops based on the second book, based on the power to change, quite a few of the people, almost every single workshop, I'll get someone either come up to me in the break or in the last 6 months or so, email me after in the webinar, and they'll put their screen blank, who have become extremely emotional because of the subject that we're talking about. We take them through the change curve. We explain that everyone erects barriers to change, and we talk about what some of the key default change barriers are. And one lady came up to me and said, "I'm really sorry. I noticed she was just sort of wiping away tears." And she said that her father had just died 3 weeks before. And the emotions I was describing around as we went around this change curve, she said, "I experienced every single one of them, and I didn't know they were normal. I thought I was weak. I thought I was a loser. I thought I was needing to go for help. I was really worried about myself. And now I just see this is a normal human reaction to change. And just realizing that is a huge first step. And the second one is to identify the barriers that you do erect to change. We all do. It's an evolutionary survival mechanism. So once you realize that this is happening normally, then there are tips and techniques that we help people with to be able to see them clearly and work to not just overcome them, but to diminish the barriers and even harness some of those emotions to help us on our way.
What a lot of the time when you're inside the box, you can't read the label on the outside, as they say. And
if
you have a boundary or a block that's stopping you from moving forward and you can't see it, it'd be great to hear what are the common ones that you see? What are those common barriers for people that they've put in place that they may not actually know that are there?
Yeah, I mean, the first one, and it is the most difficult barrier to overcome, and that's denial. The only way to overcome that, and you know that when big change is done to you, you're in denial. In fact, you just think that this is not happening. And Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, who invented the grief curve in the first place, she actually said that denial has a value. Denial actually enables you to pause to be able to soak the big change in before you can get over it. But the only way to get over denial is to admit it. But you can only admit it when you're ready, if that makes sense. There are a host of other barriers as well. Fear being a huge one. Fear of obviously financial loss. Fear of failure is a significant barrier when it comes to business. Fear of not changed earlier, or fear of being blamed is another one that I see all of the time. And that is that if someone has been in charge of a particular area that is now needing to change, they're afraid that they'll be blamed for having not changed earlier, and that we see in business all the time. So to overcoming fear of failure, it's about trying to make is momentum in small steps, which have a whole chapter on resilience in the book.
It's a really interesting point you made, Campbell. I've just in my personally, and Sean's been riding this wave with me for the last year. Took a year off, went back, started flying again, but always with a view to coming up with the last phase, the last push. Not the last one, but like the big commitment, mid-40s into 50s. And having been an entrepreneur and always been a business owner, it's this belief that you've got to own a business, you've got to build a business, and that's where your value is. But my heart's always pulled me into thought leadership, speaking, writing books, that type of environment. And I found myself for the entire year struggling to let go and really only acknowledging, I guess about maybe just only a couple of weeks ago, that it was a fear of letting go of that belief system and doing something that I really wanted to do, but because I really wanted to do it, I think deep down I was kind of scared of it and it failing. And even though you know all of this stuff, even though you have that self-awareness, it is amazing how that emotion just gets its fingers into you.
But that's perfect. There's someone of you've had a first very successful career, forging a second very successful career, and still afraid of failure. Sometimes people's fear of failure. I think it was a very good friend of mine who was a director of youngest ever director of Rothschilds. And he was afraid of being found out. He said, imposter syndrome, which is another fear of failure. Every single day he would get out of bed and go, "Today's the day they're going to find me out." And so a fear of failure, it's an ingrained thing. It's, as I said, it's evolutionary. It's normal to acknowledge that. And what you did, you just stood detached from that and went, "Isn't that interesting? After all the success, I'm still fear of failing, particularly strong when it's something you really, really want to do." That's why I didn't write my first book till I was 53. I didn't want to be a rubbish author. I wanted to be good at it. So I was scared stiff to even try. which frankly, looking back, is nonsense. But you know, so it's I completely identify with your dilemma, and it's very, very normal.
And I think that's where the real demonstration of courage is that it doesn't have to be pulling someone out of a burning building, although no doubt you'd do that, Campbell, if you happened upon that one day. But that thing where you, despite that fear, you jump into it, and I think that's where you unlock this latent potential and that sort of free fall moment between the book being published and the success and the investment is I think human beings create so many amazing things in that moment.
I think you're right. The big wait was the 2 weeks before I submitted it to Wiley, and they said yes. And I thought, what if again someone says no? And this book, I put my heart and soul into it. This is a story of my life and change. This is going to relaunch my consultancy. I was working in the Middle East at the time. It was going to relaunch my consultancy, and I thought, oh my gosh, I've really gone out on the edge of the cliff here. This I've gone out on a limb. Why did you set yourself up for this level of failure, Campbell? And then at the last minute they said yes, and I think I fainted.
That's a huge demonstration of relief right there.
And again, as we know, like all of that emotion, all of that fear and concern and worry, it only comes from us. We make it all up in our own heads.
That is so true, Sean.
It is just normal. It is just every single person, you know, and you know, same thing like yourself, Bill. I mean, I've gone through a number of changes in the last couple of years. You know, different cities, you know, personal changes, business changes, and every time when you say yes to something, and well, my thing is say yes to it and then figure it out afterwards. You're like, oh shit, like because now the change is going to come because I've said yes. I don't have a choice, you know. So that's helped most of the time.
Sean, you've just described my career. I've just kept being tapped on the shoulder and doing daft things. So I was tapped on the shoulder.
What a good path.
When I moved to the UK to be marketing director of this new company called Virgin Wines, which was going to be, you know, which was a online wine business. And I went, sure, what would you like me to do? And they said, marketing director. And I went, that's interesting. I've never been one of those before. So why don't I do that? And then I was tapped on the shoulder to be HR director of a 1,000-person wealth management firm. And I went, really? HR is the one thing not on the CV? And he went, no, you'd be really good at it. So I became HR director. And then the next thing was strategy director of Zurich for the emerging markets division. And it's such an illogical, you know, failed pilot, you know, with physics degree. So I've never used that. You know, went on to be multimedia entrepreneur, not knowing what that meant. Anderson Consulting said yes because they couldn't spell multimedia either. And then went on to all sorts of different things. Marketing director, HR director, strategy director. I then ended up in the Middle East, advising the world's largest, or the Middle East's largest sovereign wealth fund on strategic change. And I'm thinking, how did that happen? And it happened because a Jewish headhunter in New York found me on LinkedIn. So life is full of change. And it's a friend of mine said the other day that people say I'm a really lucky person. He was talking about himself. He said, I'm not. It's just when opportunity taps me on the shoulder, I recognize that's happened and I follow it. And that ends up, to me, that's what luck is, to realize, recognize, and think, what the hell, as you said, Sean, what the dickens, why don't I go and say yes to this and work it out afterwards? We've got similar lives.
I don't normally tell jokes on the podcast, but there is one that I like, which talks about that, and it's there's a
branching in a new territory.
Yeah, there's a and this is you know, not meant to be negative anyway, but there's a priest and it's raining heavily and it starts to flood, and they come along in a little rowboat and say, you know, hop in quick, you know, we'll save you. He goes, no, it's okay, God's going to save me. And then it gets higher and higher and higher. And so a speedboat comes along, quick, hop in, and we'll save you. And he's like, no, it's all right, God's going to save me. Anyway, it gets right up to the rooftop. He's standing on the rooftop, and a helicopter comes, drops a ladder down. No, God's going to save me. Anyway, of course, he drowns. And he goes up to heaven, and he says, what were you doing? And he goes, well, I sent you a rowboat, a speedboat, and a helicopter. You didn't take the opportunity. You know, it's like, but I mean, I like that in the context. It's not about being religious, but the point is that it's sometimes they're right in front of your face, but you just don't see them because you're so set in your ways and so set in like a paradigm that you either don't want to see it or no, it's going to happen this way. Well, change doesn't happen the way you want it to change. Change often happens the way you don't want it to change.
But Sean, something you mentioned before that I thought I'd pick up on. You were talking about how all of these concerns and fears and whatever is between our ears. And there's a chapter in The Power to Change that I recommend you read called there's a whole section on the psychology of change. And I talk about, placebos, as you would expect, and the power of the mind and how powerful this organ is between our ears to either stop us doing stuff and how we can harness its power, for good, to sound like a superhero writer. But when I was researching placebos, I found a case of placebo surgery. We all know that placebos are the sugar pills you take, and if you think that they're painkillers, you won't feel the pain. It's even more powerful than that, because sometimes with people, when you tell them, by the way, this is a sugar pill, the act of taking the pill still relieves the pain. But even further than that, I found this placebo surgery where 20 years ago, I'll just read it. The New England Journal of Medicine reported on a trial of 180 patients who were sent for an arthroscopy of the knee for osteoarthritis. Now, they were separated into two groups. One group that had the normal surgery and the other that had sham surgery. So they could both just see the cloth or the screen. That was it. That's the word I was looking for. So they couldn't see the knee, and they just simply made an incision in the knee and then sewed it up again. They did absolutely nothing, and they found absolutely no difference between the group that had actually had the surgery and the group that had actually had the sham surgery in terms of pain, in terms of time for recovery, or in terms of how well the knee worked 6-8 weeks later. It was it floored me, so I had to put her in the book.
That's amazing.
Power of the mind's incredible.
So Campbell, just on a personal note, you said it took 50 odd years before you wrote your first book, and now you're kind of like prolifically publishing. What happens when it comes to change, and then the momentum and confidence that comes from winning, like of good change?
That's everything. No, that's a good point. That's a good point. Yes, it took me 53 years, and then why then? Book 3 is going to be out later on in the year, but why that sort of happened in 4 years, then there ends up 3 going from 1 book to 3 books, is exactly what we're talking about before. Is opportunity happened. So the first book was published, the Change Catalyst, all about leading change, that Wiley published, a great hardback book. It's a beautiful book. That then went on to win the 2018 Business Book of the Year. So then at 2019, I was asked to be the keynote speaker at the event for the next year's Business Book Awards, and sitting there were all of the publishers in the UK, all the business book publishers in the UK. So I happened to mention I was writing the second book, and that will be available. So I had a choice of people to have a chat to, and wonderfully, Kogan Page wanted to write that book. Having picked up an agent between book 1 and book 2, he then pitched book 3, the idea that I'd had for years about this change that you've done, that you've both done actually, which is changing careers in the second half of your life. So then part 2 is what it's called, Thriving in the Second Half of Your Life, that Hachette has decided to publish. But it all came from engineering and accepting opportunities, and not just seeing the win of the Business Book of the Year to be, oh, isn't that great? Then I can sit back. It's like, no, that's an opportunity. That's a stepping stone to move on.
So Campbell, is Jane your wife?
She is.
So not only have you managed to write a couple of books, you've managed to collaborate with your wife on your third book
during a year of pandemic lockdown. Yeah, if that's not a marriage tester, I don't know what is.
The perfect time.
Question I have, we're talking about saying yes to opportunity when you get tapped on the shoulder. How do you differentiate between an opportunity and a distraction when it taps you on the shoulder? Because they kind of feel the same.
Sure.
Oh, that's a good one.
No idea. That is $64 million
That's
question.
straight out of the catapult. Look at that.
Oh, it really is. No, when you work that one out, give us a call.
So there you have it. Yeah, we don't know.
It's so difficult
It is.
because that is a really good point. This third book, I didn't know at the time whether it was going to be a distraction, because books take a lot of effort to write, particularly if you want them to be good. That it takes a lot of effort. So
don't you think, Campbell, it's like that, what's a good idea and a bad idea? And I think when you become used to change, or used to understand the success side of failure, did you not sort of socialize that quickly, get feedback from other people, and start to test that idea? Because what I find is, when you have a gazillion great ideas, if you don't tell anyone about them, you keep thinking they're great ideas.
That's true. Yeah, I've got a really good mate of mine back in Sydney. Is I would say, my personal coach. I grew up with him, and he coaches the whole real estate industry in Australia. He's a bit of a superstar, and he's the person. Actually, Jane's the first one, obviously, and then the second one would be Michael, who I'd just pick up the phone to and say, "I've got this idea. What do you think?" And he's always optimistic. Oh, I can see how to make that work. I knew this third book. I knew the second book was a good idea because I was already running workshops on it. The third one, I just gut feel knew it was a good idea. And you're right. We spoke to lots of people our age and younger saying, we think of writing this book. What do you think? And every single response was, when can I read it? So that was good. But it could have still been a distraction. Who knows what it's going to lead to? We're hoping it's going to lead to workshops and speeches and programs for businesses. But it might just be a really interesting book that a handful of people buy. You never know.
Oh, no, I'm fascinated. I'm fascinated by it, and I never thought I'd be at this point in my life where that factored into my decision making, which was, but I'm 46, and I'm like, when did I start thinking like that? When did that become part of the plan? And like, I better be safer. And it's like, no, you've got all this experience now. Now's the time to double down.
That's it. That is exactly it. You've nailed it. We've ignored Sean's question, and we're going on to something we both know what we can talk about. And yeah, you've nailed it. It's actually, I've got all this experience. What am I going to do with it? And there's a vitality. I can see you, falling into the ocean as you are at the moment. But I can see you with energy there, saying, yeah, what I've got this experience. What do I do with it? And that's what the second half is all about. The first half was just practice.
That's right. To me, the statement you said before about making sure you're asking people to run past ideas and things rather than doing it in your own isolated perspective. But the thing that I guess I've looked at too is, and what I tell my, anyone who I work with or ask me the question about, this idea, it's like, who else have you spoken to this about? And they're like, my cousin, blah, blah. And what do they do? Oh, he's a baker. I'm like, so is he an expert in this field that you're looking to step into? No. So you're taking his opinion on board for what reason? So the point being that you don't take on
because he's going to like the idea.
Yeah, because whether he liked it or didn't, but he's got no basis of his opinion. So yes, ask people, but make sure, you definitely got to ask the right.
And I don't know about you, Sean, but when I sort of started going out, when I started in business and having ideas, I was really careful not to tell anyone, because almost like you don't want it to be shot down because you value your own ideas so much. And I think one of the great things that comes with age and maturity is letting that go and like just embrace the help around you. And some of the recurring themes we see in the few, Campbell, it'd be great to hear if you reinforce this, and you mentioned it about your coach, was the quality of the people around you and their ability to have those really honest discussions where you don't get that artificial harmony, that artificial niciness, where the people around you will say, hey, that's really good, or that's actually a really dumb idea.
Yeah, and you've got to surround yourself with people whose opinions you really trust, because they're going to tell you their version of the truth. They're not going to gild it or sugarcoat it in a way that is unhealthy. But that means you've got to have an inner strength to believe that, an inner strength to be able to cope with the fact that they might say this idea that you've got is rubbish. They might point out some areas where you're not very good at and you need to be better. But they're doing that from a position of love, from a position of respect to help you. And so you've got to almost get rid of your ego in a sense. And if you get rid of your ego, but you've still got the core strength and belief in yourself, then you can be open to suggestions. And also, they're not always right. So it's okay. I can see where you're coming from. I get that. Thank you for that opinion. I get why you've said that, but that doesn't actually tie in with my values, with what I want to achieve. But there's a couple of good points in there. But I'm not going to do exactly what you've said. I'm going to take a couple of learnings and go off in a slightly different direction that I was planning, but still vaguely in the same direction. But you just need to be open to find people who love and respect you, that you can that are saying things for all the right reasons.
And if it is rubbish, then it's going to save you a heck of a lot of time and headache. So
hey, look, 8 out of 10 new ideas don't really make it. So most of this is the thing. When it comes to writing books, particularly, you sort of think, oh my gosh, all this effort, and it might be nonsense. Or it might not succeed, or it might, that's part of life too,
It is, and I think that was one of the what I'm always super grateful for as a fighter pilot was, you talked about in as a fighter pilot, everything is change, right? Everything is super fast, super changeable, but we built systems to deal with that. But the systems was so incredibly simple and basic, and that conversation, because you hit the nail on the head there, Campbell. You said, you get feedback from someone, you don't necessarily have to agree with them, but you value the feedback. And this concept of a red team, which is when we do all this planning as a fighter pilot, when we get ready to go and we go on a mission, one person just has a look at it, asks a few salient questions, and it's a one-way conversation. You don't justify, but here's what I was thinking, and here's why it's such a great idea. You just take it and you go, okay, well, yeah, 1 or 2 points you made were quite valid.
Find the nuggets in that question. Find the nuggets of wisdom that you can do something with. Find the things that are. I always use the word nuggets in my workshops. You've got to find that in this workshop today. If you go away with one nugget, then it's been a really good use of your time. I think you'll go away with more than that. Take a piece of paper, write nuggets on the top, and every time you hear a good idea or you say something, you think, "Oh, that was good," write it down. And we're going to share our nuggets at the end of this. End of this.
Probably being in the military.
Don't go there, Pete. Don't go there.
So, yes.
Back away.
It's funny.
I see an in-joke between you guys. Right.
No, it's so you just get indoctrinated into some certain language, and
yes, you do.
It's a good word. It's a good word.
It is. It's better than plums. So yes. So look, when did you stop flying as a fighter pilot?
I was forcibly stopped 16 years ago now. I remember when people used to ask me that question, I was like, 11 years ago. And then all of a sudden it became 16. I'm like, what the hell? Where did that 5 years go? So I medically discharged. That was it for me. And then 10 years in the entrepreneurial wilderness, and then self-awakening when someone introduced me to this afterburner concept. And I sat there and a fighter pilot talked about applying what we did in business. I'm like, holy smokes, that's what I've been doing. I've been doing all of that stuff I was trained to do by accident, applying it into the entrepreneurial world, and it worked great. And similar to your experiences, Campbell, when you talk to someone that doesn't experience change, you have to use the word change. But if I was to have a conversation with you, I wouldn't even use that word. It would just be life. It would just be. It'd just be our existence, our journey, our choice.
And to realize it's tough. It's that there's a lot of emotions as we talked about. There's a lot of barriers we put up, and it's all about building resilience, really, and realizing that change is a part of life. It's as you said, it is just life, isn't it? Well, it's like leadership is leading change. Otherwise, you're just managing the status quo. So anyone says, "Oh, well, no, that's a change project. I'll get someone in to lead that." No. Life is a change project. Business is a change. Leadership is leading change.
And I think Sean, you get that, and Campbell, you get that. But I've had an opportunity to work with a couple of very, very big organisations doing change, and you would go in week after week, and it's like it's just not working. It is not getting momentum. And one of the key areas, and you said it before a while, right at the start, and I've been just holding on to this question. One of the things I really have noticed in bigger organizations, that the real killer of effective change is no one talks. People tell. I've been working on this for a month. Do it. And everyone's like, whoa, where was I for that month? What are you talking about? Why are we doing? The whole month you were doing that, we've been fine. Why the big change? Redundancies everywhere, everything's moving, and it's like this absolute shell shock. And the only response the organisation has is not doing it. I'm going to think up every possible reason I can imagine to say no.
Yeah. Of course, because people need to be engaged properly in understanding the thought process. They not only need to know what we're changing, but they need to know why, and they can't just be told why. In one of the slides that I use in my speeches is a wonderful little pithy comment that says one of the reasons why change fails is that too often we listen to reply rather than listen to understand. And that happens in business, well, it happens in life, but it happens in business all the time. The leader will stand up, or the change project leader or whatever, and say, here's all the work we've done, just as you said, and this is what we're doing. And it's cold to everyone. They're thinking, hang on, well, why do we need to be doing this? Why is that the best solution you've come up with to a problem that I didn't even know existed? So engaging people is just so obvious, but it's one of the big reasons why.
But why do we not do it? Why is it such a default behavior to just not be collaborative like that? I look at it and I go, why would you have thought that would work? Why did you think that approach?
Because for some reason, people have in the past, and I'm hoping it's one of the good things to come out of COVID, is that we realize that life and work have all intertwined, and actually every business is a people business. But in the past, the people we've hired to be change managers are emotionally unintelligent clipboard holders. They're people that only think in terms of projects. They only think in terms of those. So that there's no EQ there. There's no realization that it's emotions that rule the day. That if we don't get people on board, if we don't appeal to their emotions, it ain't going to work. Logic is 1/5 of the way there. So, and what they seem to hire people in the past as project managers or as change management, which is a term that I loathe. Change management project managers is people who are just really much better with chevrons and spreadsheets than they are with people. And business is all about people. So when I go into an organization, I run leading change workshops for the leaders throughout the organization. And where it works, only where it works, is when the top team also does the workshop. So many times I've gone in for large fund managers, global fund managers, actually, global wealth managers, companies. And it's the CEO that's brought me in and has said, oh, but the exec team doesn't need to do this. Which is like, oh, I'll take the money.
I cannot believe that all the time. Can you come in and fix all my people? Can you tell them to be better and to do what I tell them better?
It's your fault.
Actually, what one CEO brought me in and said, Cam, I've got the strategy. I need you to, and he waved his hands around and said, I need you to do your workshop thing and get everyone aligned to my strategy.
Okay, wave your magic wand.
Okay.
Sit down. You're not going to want to hear this.
Way, and it works.
So
I just find that baffling. And what the spin-off of that in companies that are valued at billions of dollars, the wastage is mind-blowing. I mean, you must have seen inordinate sums of money, and you alluded to it before, that are a direct cost of change. But what's the intangible cost of change?
Well, that's why I said before that emotion's 4 times more powerful than logic. When it comes to employee engagement, it's all about engaging people emotionally. It's about being emotionally intelligent. And if you don't do that, there's a great piece of research that I'll put on our website from the Corporate Leadership Council. The website's changeandstrategy.com if you want to have a look at it. And and that talks about the value that is lost in businesses by not engaging with their people, and it's in the trillions, to be perfectly honest, if you extrapolate it worldwide. But it's if you want shareholder value to increase, if you want things to be delivered, then the only way is to engage and empower your people. We all know this. If we're up for it, if we're ready for this change, if we're ready to move in a different direction, we're going to really deliver for this. If we're only, oh yeah, I get the logic, and the logic is shareholders need more money and we need more profit, and my heart's not in it. Thanks.
It's so true. It's so true. And to get
but
those
it's a skill. Sorry, Boo. It's a skill that leaders need to develop. It can't just be. They can't just slot a chip in to them.
And you know what? I've got about. I can just all these names and roles are flipping through my head. Who I'm personally emailing this podcast to, who are in those executive leadership roles, and just, hey, look, guys, had a lovely chat with this gentleman over in the UK. His name's Campbell. I reckon there might be something in this for you.
I think we need to run some workshops together. We'll talk after this.
Awesome. You've clearly spent a lot of time involved in change, as we all do, but actually, as Boo, you alluded to earlier, it was, when you've actually identified change as change, not just stuff happening and going, okay, well, how do we bottle this? How do we communicate this? How do we manage this? How do we lead this change? So you've learned a heck of a lot, in your 53 or so years. If you were to take some piece of wisdom that you've taken from that and go back to a younger version of yourself, what would you say to them? What would you tell them? Teach them?
When you sent me the list of questions you might ask, that what I thought about that is that if I was to tell my 21-year-old self that had taken off his bone dome and had his parachute for the last time, which was just before my 21st birthday, and said, you're not going to do this again because you're really rubbish at it. What I would tell him is that no one is as clever or as confident as they seem. And also to trust yourself and to believe in yourself, that the innate skills and assets that you have are really valuable. And frankly, that I could be saying that to anybody. And the last thing would be, don't waste your time. I had 10 years in the wilderness after leaving the Air Force as well. Don't waste your time, because time is really precious. But most importantly is to trust yourself, like yourself, and value yourself.
Campbell, you've taken yourself out of the podcast. You've just asked Sean's last question. Okay. I'm looking at Sean's face drop. He's like, oh, that's my moment.
I just asked the question. You must have missed it.
Oh, did you? I thought what you said when you looked at the list of questions.
That was the segue. That was the segue into it. As you said, it's a Friday afternoon here. Late Friday afternoon here in Australia. So
one of us needs a coffee and another needs a beer, I think.
I think so.
My hand up for beer. Thank you.
But that's been incredible conversation today, Campbell. It's reminded me of a few things and taught me a few new things. I think one of the adages I live by.
You sure we don't want to ask Campbell what he would do and say to his younger self?
Third time lucky.
Yeah, I'm
right. But it's about approaching. Always approach every situation like a 5-year-old. Be like curious as to why. What can you learn from this situation? And that's the whole point of these podcasts, is to teach people those little nuggets, as you call them, that they can pick up and apply into their life, and hopefully make it a little easier on their journey. But massive show of appreciation for you and your time today, Campbell. Really appreciate it.
And that wraps up another episode of The Few. Thank you to our partners, Afterburner, for team building, development and alignment. We understand now how important it is to have the right people around you. Get them on board with where you want to go. Momentum Media, the largest industry publisher in the country, connecting your business to the Australian community. ICMI, Australia's premier speaker bureau, representing the few that do fulfill their life's purpose. And finally, Sean's Inner Circle, the business coaching organisation for small and medium enterprises looking to make that next step. Thanks again for listening in and downloading today. Please leave a review on whatever platform you are currently listening to this podcast, and reach out to our partners who can help you make the transition to the few.
Absolute pleasure. I've really enjoyed it and looking forward to working with you both.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
thanks, Campbell, for being so generous with your time and knowledge. Really appreciate it, mate.
Thank you.
All right.